incident that happened in New Zealand wasn't taken lightly, and we've been working hard to make sure that the Islamic Center and everyone who calls this place their second home not only feels safe, but is also protected. So inshallah, going forward, you'll be seeing a cruiser and a police officer here at the center every Friday, inshallah. We also hired a highly skilled and very technical security company who specializes in these types of situations. They have been attending the center and are here today to assess our entire operation from both the inside and out, where they will be pointing out our strengths and more importantly our weaknesses, and where they'll be providing us with very important training techniques as well. The goal here is inshallah to improve the areas that we need to improve on with an end goal of protecting this institution and everybody with it. So we just want you all to know the work that we're doing behind the scenes to ensure everybody's safety. And lastly, our guest imam who will be delivering the Jummah khutbah today is Brother Obaidullah Khan. Obaidullah is currently a student of knowledge with Ijaz in Hadith. He has studied under Shaykh Adnan for Usul al-Fiqh and Arabic. He is currently living here in London and regularly does khutbahs at Western and Medway. It's our pleasure to have as our guest today, Brother Obaidullah. Thank you very much for your time. Jazakallahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Indeed, all praise is due to Allah. We praise Him, we seek His help, and we seek His forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evil in our actions and the evil in ourselves. Whomsoever Allah guides, there is none that can misguide them. And whomsoever Allah leads astray, there is none that can guide them back to the straight path. And bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah Azza wa Jal, Al-Wahid, Al-Ahad. And that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the last and final messenger. Allah says in the Quran, "Ba'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu ittaqu Allaha haqqa tuqatih, wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun." He said, "O you who believe, have taqwa of Allah, have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't die except as Muslims, except in the state of Islam." Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. The religion that we follow is one that is guided by a lot of different sources. Guided by several different sources, including the Quran, including the Sunnah. And both of these together, complementarily, guide us in our religion. Together. They can never be separated, and one cannot be interpreted without the guidance of the other. In our case, alhamdulillah, whenever we are raising our children, we raise them to become huffaz. And we give them lots of knowledge of the Quran, of the details of the Arabic language and of grammar, nahu, sarf, all of these different details. In the scholars of the past, when they used to use the word hafiz, hafiz used to refer to somebody who had memorized more than 10,000 hadith. It was used to refer to hadith, actually. And traditionally, the word for somebody who was a hafiz in our definition, or somebody who has memorized the Quran, is hamil. Somebody who carries the Quran with them, carries it within their heart. They recite it from their heart. And whenever they recite it, all those words start affecting to the heart, and it doesn't stop at the throat. That was the definition. And much of the reason why we have misguidance within our religion, or we have very basic questions related to our religion, is because we don't have a true understanding of the hadith and of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. We don't always look to his actions and we try to learn from it. That is just as much a wahi to us as the Quran is. Although the Quran has been preserved and a lot of effort has been made in preserving it, it is true that the hadith do not have that same level of care. But what is true is that it is part of wahi. What is true is that compared to any other religion, our religion has placed a great emphasis on the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ. And just like the Hafiz Ibn Hajar, Hafiz here meaning somebody who has memorized lots of hadith, Ibn Hajar once said that the isnad, or like the chain of narration that is part of each hadith, that is part of our religion. And if it wasn't part of our religion, anyone could say whatever they wanted. And so today we'll be talking about an incident during the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and how it has a lot of benefits for us to learn from. Several benefits. And this incident is the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah, of course, is a time when the Muslims, for once, had peace across the Arabian nation. In the sense that the Quraysh, who were the arch enemies of the Muslims once the Muslims became more prominent, it was the one time when the Muslims agreed with the Quraysh that we are not going to fight. It is also the time when they agreed that the Arabs are going to be allowed to choose alliance with whomever they wish. So just to give a bit of a background, the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims were living in Medina, and they had to escape to Medina because of all this oppression that they were facing in Mecca. And each year, almost every year, there was a battle. So the first year there was Badr, second year there was Uhud, and then following that there were several skirmishes that followed, until it came to a head when the Battle of Ahzab came along, and every single tribe faced the Muslims at that time. And the Muslims had no allies who could help them. And even the allies who they thought were their neighbors and were living in Medina with them, even they turned their backs against the Muslims. And so it was obviously a very, very tough time. And if it wasn't for the patience that the Sahaba declared, and if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help during that battle, the Muslims would not have been victorious. And so imagine, the Muslims have just escaped a very, very tough battle. A very tough one. And so after that, obviously there is a need for the Muslims to be able to have some sort of an alliance. Some sort of an alliance. And so that's where the Treaty of Hudaybiyah came along. The Prophet ﷺ himself had seen a dream that he's going to be doing Umrah. And so he tells the Sahaba, I have been given the command to be able to go to Umrah. And obviously that would be a very good sign from the Muslims, because now the Quraysh would not be able to deny them entry. They wouldn't be allowed to say no to them. And even if they did, it's going to look bad on them against the rest of Arabia. And so the entire agreement of Hudaybiyah happened even on the way to Mecca. So while they were making their way to Umrah, the Quraysh actually made a lot of stops and made a lot of hurdles. And once those hurdles came along, then the Muslims could not pass over them, and they had to stop in Hudaybiyah, camp over there. And so the first thing that the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba was, yes, we're going to go into Mecca, but I think we should camp here for our safety. And so the Sahaba, they are so enthusiastic, they want to go for Umrah, and so they said, yes, we're going to stop here. And so they stopped. And then after that, while they're waiting there, the Quraysh start sending people so that they can have some sort of an agreement to see whether the Muslims are allowed to go or not. And so while that is happening, there's obviously a bit of tension. Uthman radiallahu anh is sent inside so that he can be part of the negotiations. And while he's speaking with the Quraysh, it's taking a very long time. And so the Prophet ﷺ makes the second command to all the Sahaba. And he says, it seems as though Uthman is inside and he is a bit unsafe. If something happens to him, all of us are going to make an agreement that we are going to avenge his death. And so the Sahaba, without question, they say, yes, we're going to do that. And then after that, there is obviously the tension that they might end up having to fight, and they would have no choice but to fight. And so the Sahaba said, yes, without a doubt, we will fight. And then after that, once the Prophet ﷺ makes the agreement, the news comes to the Sahaba that they're not going to be doing Umrah that year. There are a lot of benefits that we can take from this story. A lot of benefits. But the foremost benefit is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was persistent in making sure that there was peace. He was persistent in making sure that some agreement came along between him and the Quraysh. And so part of that agreement of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was that the Arabs would be allowed to seek alliance with whomever they wish. And so the Muslims can seek alliance with many of the other Arab tribes which had traditionally been with the Quraysh. The Muslims would now be allowed to seek alliance with some of the Jewish tribes. They would be allowed to seek alliance with a lot of the other native tribes, some of whom were mushrikeen and some of whom didn't really follow the religion. And so that's how it continued. That's how the Prophet ﷺ was able to seek out what he wanted. And since the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, many tribes came to Medina and they sought alliance with the Prophet ﷺ. And not only sought alliance, but they also became Muslim. Because it's in the time of peace that people will be able to see the truth. That's what the Prophet ﷺ was seeking. The second benefit that I'm probably going to go in a little bit more detail regarding is the resilience of the Sahaba. Imagine our situation today. We have certain Islamic organizations, or we have leaders within the Muslim community. And there's no question that the Prophet ﷺ serves as the best example of the leader, and while all of us try to emulate that example of the leader, we will fall short. Nevertheless, the Prophet ﷺ has told us to be able to follow our leaders, to make sure that we follow their advice. Can you imagine the amount of trust that we have in our leadership today? The amount of trust that we have in them, that they have our best interests in mind. Do we really feel that? Do we genuinely feel that that's the case? And this is not a political khutbah. I won't talk about current day politics. But what I will mention is something that is in essence to each Muslim's heart. It is nothing related to politics. The essence of each Muslim's heart is the fact that they give the benefit of the doubt to somebody who is struggling and trying their best. Struggling and trying their best. And so what our job is, as followers of a certain community, is to be able to follow what the leadership is saying and take it with our own grain of salt. Obviously, we will never agree to a leader that is going to encourage us to do sin. We're not talking about those clear lines. We're talking about those finer lines. What about those times when we feel that the leader might not have our best interests at heart? Do we take the effort to advise them? Do we take the effort to advise them? And do we take the effort to take time out of our own schedule to make sure that they be advised? Do we take time out of our own schedule to make sure that the community has leaders like us and we be able to make a commitment with the community? Alhamdulillah, when it comes to the community of London, there's no question that alhamdulillah we are incredibly well taken care of when it comes to our own risk. Many of us have been living here for several decades. Many of us are in very, very good professions. And alhamdulillah, when it comes to Ramadan and when it comes to fundraising, we give without thinking. And so obviously we raise a lot of money for the masajid, we raise a lot of money for the iftars. We ourselves make an effort to give part or take part in those iftars and give food to those iftars. But what the community needs sorely are people who can make decisions for them. All of us make very good decisions in our own professions, and we have that ability. And it's in many ways like a muscle. The more decisions we make, the better we get at making decisions. But how much of that is being given back to the community? How much of that is being given to the community in the sense that we are advising the community where to spend their money? We are advising the community how to raise our children. And of course, I don't mean to discount whoever is involved in the community, because we have several volunteers. But when it comes to part of the newer generation, what we see more and more often, is that they start high school thinking that they need to become professional. They go through university thinking they need to become professional. And once they start on their careers and they're juniors in their own career, their goal is to make sure that they can become a senior, that they can progress within their own careers. And so because of that laser focus that each of us have, we become very good at becoming professionals. But when it comes to making decisions for the community, are we good at that? Do we take time out of our own day and schedule to be able to do that? And so the contrast that I'm trying to show is part of our prioritization as a community. And how the Sahaba themselves were those who would always give advice to the Prophet ﷺ. And they knew that the Prophet ﷺ was somebody who was an excellent leader. He was somebody who knew how to make decisions. And we know it because of the amount of learning that he's had based on all the calamities that he's faced. You know, he's lost his parents at a young age. He's lost his mother at a young age. His father he was never able to see. His wife he lost when he was in his 50s. And he also lost his uncle around the same time. And so these were incredible supports for him. And time after time, whoever was a very close support to him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them away from him. Took them away. And we know that there's a wisdom behind it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاصْطَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي. He said that about Musa alayhi salam. وَاصْطَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي. I have created you, I have molded you, I have shaped you for myself. And so just like Musa alayhi salam, whose stories are mentioned over and over and over again to the Prophet ﷺ to build resilience in him, that's how the Prophet ﷺ became an excellent leader. That was the means through which he became an excellent leader. And from our perspective, we have our own challenges that we deal with. But with those challenges, how much of that talent are we putting to use? How much of that talent are we putting to use within the community? There's so many youth that hope that they can find a leader that is relatable to them. And they would give anything to have that. And you notice that whenever you have certain halaqat where the speaker might be speaking, saying something very funny, or saying something that really relates to the youth, then you notice how enthusiastic they are in listening to that. But how often do we find that? How often do we find that? And the reality is that we won't know, others won't know us as well as we know ourselves. And so this is my message to the youth and the young professionals out here, that when it comes to relating to us and relating to the newer generation, we do it best. We do it best. And so my advice would be that we encourage ourselves in learning more about the religion, spending more time in the masjid, and when it comes to volunteering and when it comes to organizing events, that we spend our time and our effort. And it's with that we build a certain amount of resilience. Resilience in the sense that we are balancing both our careers as well as our deen. Our deen as well as our dunya. And there's no question that it's going to be very difficult. But it's something that is needed. It's something that is sorely, sorely needed. And so from the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, we realize that the Sahaba were the people who were told initially that they'll be going to Umrah. They pack up their bags, they prepare, they go with the Prophet ﷺ. Then they are told, okay, we're going to camp here, we're not going to be in Mecca yet. The Sahaba say, okay, no problem. And then they are told, Uthman is inside for a very long time, we might have to fight. And they say, yes, no question about it. And then after that, they are told, we might actually have to take up arms against Quraysh. They say, no question about it, we'll do it for you, Ya Rasulullah. And then after that, when they are told that they're eventually not going to be able to do Umrah, that's the last straw that they had. And that's when they were in shock. And they realized, subhanAllah, we are not going to be able to do Umrah this year, after all the effort that we've gone through, after everything. And even before they could say anything in disobedience to the Prophet ﷺ, they are just in shock. And the Prophet ﷺ himself, obviously he is dealing with the rest of the Sahaba, and in an effort to make sure that they follow his command, what he does is that he shaves his head. And it's his wife, Salama, who famously tells him and gives him advice, and he does that. And he shaves his head as part of the ritual of the Umrah, and as part of the reward of the Umrah itself. And that's when the Sahaba start shaving their heads as well. And that's when some of them realize our Umrah is accepted. Even though we're not able to go inside Mecca and see the Kaaba, and do the tawaf around the Kaaba, and go between Safa and Marwa and do the rituals of Umrah, alhamdulillah, at least we are able to say that we got the reward. We're able to say that we got the reward. And that brings me to my next point. So our first point, just to summarize, was the fact that the Prophet ﷺ himself had a vision. And he worked very hard to be able to obtain that vision. And the second point being that the Sahaba showed an incredible amount of resilience. And that's what we need in ourselves today. The third point that the Prophet really, or the seerah really shows us in the story, is the fact that there will be several times when we work incredibly hard for a certain goal, but we don't attain it. Work incredibly hard for it, but we don't attain it. And so the Prophet ﷺ was working hard to make sure that they can go for Umrah, and they weren't able to. They also went into the Battle of Uhud with a lot of enthusiasm, some more than others, and they weren't able to win that battle either. What this shows us is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always puts us through challenges where we don't get what we obtain. We won't get what we obtain. And we need to be able to make sense of that. We need to be able to learn from that. And there are many psychological papers and papers and research that talk about resilience as a concept in positive psychology. And it's a field within psychology where they say that for anyone who goes through a lot of trouble in their childhood, that is a foundation for them in becoming very successful later in life. That is a foundation for them becoming very successful in life. And so a lot of the famous leaders, we know the story of the Prophet ﷺ himself, we know the story of Musa alayhi salam, but they even mention contemporary figures. They mention Gandhi, they mention Martin Luther King, and they talk about all the challenges that they faced when they were young. And even though many of them came from positions of privilege initially, they were able to keep building on it to be able to relate to the common man. And these weren't the only examples, but they mentioned several other ones, and they say that this idea of resilience keeps building over and over again these people because they were able to face challenges earlier on. Why? They faced their failures. They faced their failures. And so in the case of the Prophet ﷺ, I mentioned a lot of the difficulties that he's had during his life. I mentioned all the family members that he's lost, and obviously this is not the only things that he's had. We know many stories of where the Bedouins of Arabia would behave with him very rudely. And there was one time a Bedouin came to the Prophet ﷺ and he snatched his scarf while he was on a camel. And he snatched it and he said, Ya Muhammad, and he said it in a very rude manner, because every Sahabi is told to say Rasulullah. So he says, Ya Muhammad, give me from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. And so the Prophet ﷺ smiles, and there's a few different stories of this, but in one of those stories, he takes out the scarf and he gives it to the Bedouin. He takes out his scarf and gives it to the Bedouin with a smile on his face. With a smile. The Prophet ﷺ wouldn't always get whatever he wanted. But if in case something like this happens where things weren't planned, he would be able to deal with it. And he would be able to get the reward for that. And this reminds us of the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ told us how amazing is the state of the believer. When good things are happening with him, he makes shukr, and that is good for him. And when bad things are happening to him, he has sabr, and that is good for him. So each of those opportunities becomes a springboard through which the believer keeps going through stages and stages and stages, no matter what the challenge. No matter what the challenge. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So in the first clip we talked about some of the learning points that we had from the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The first being that the Prophet ﷺ had a vision. Second being that the Sahaba built a lot of resilience during it. And the third being that even though they didn't get what they wanted, they obtained the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They obtained the full reward of doing the Umrah, even though they didn't do it. Some of the learning points that we have for us include several. For us as Muslims, we realize that worship is at the core of everything we do. It defines the 5 pillars of Islam. It defines the salah that we do. It defines the zakah that we give. And so for all of these things, there is a certain amount of resilience that we need to build for that. Consistency. Istiqamah, as we say in Arabic. Istiqamah. And so in a very famous story a very famous narration comes from Sufyan al-Thawri. Sufyan al-Thawri was Atba al-Tabi'i. So meaning he was the student of a student of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, or the student of a student of a Sahabi. And so Sufyan al-Thawri was a very, very famous scholar. Incredibly famous scholar. In fact, his name would probably have been of one of the madhahib, just like Abu Hanifa, just like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, just like Imam al-Shafi'i, and just like Imam Malik, if it weren't for the fact that the government of his time didn't like him. And so he had to go into hiding for most of his life. And it's in hiding that he passed away. Or else his caliber was really like the caliber of Abu Hanifa, and he knew Abu Hanifa at the time when they were both alive. Sufyan al-Thawri once said that for the first 20 years when I started doing Qiyam al-Layl, I noticed that it was incredibly difficult for me. No matter how much I prayed, the khushu just wouldn't come in my heart. It just wouldn't come. But I kept doing it, and doing it, and doing it. Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed me to come to the next stage, at which point I couldn't live without the sweetness of Qiyam al-Layl. I couldn't live without it. The first resilience that we need to build in ourselves is that of worship. Is that of worship. If we are finding it very difficult to be able to pray 5 times a day, then that's something incredibly embarrassing for us. If you're finding it difficult to be able to pray Qiyam al-Layl, then that's something that we can keep building on. But at the basics, that's something each of us need to build in ourselves. If that foundation is there, everything else becomes easy. Everything else becomes easy. It's a quality that we need to build in ourselves within our workplace. And if we realize that work is getting busy, we need to find a way to be able to take time out. We need to set limits with our work to make sure that we take time out. And alhamdulillah, the fact that all of us are here for Jumu'ah, it means that we were able to do that. Alhamdulillah for that. Alhamdulillah. And that's the first portion. We need to build resiliency within our worship. The second is within our behavior. I've already mentioned the story of the Prophet ﷺ and how he was smiling to the Bedouin who was rude to him. There are also several other stories of the Prophet ﷺ where he had a smile on his face whenever he would deal with people who were rude to him. And so if each of these opportunities comes along where there's a lot of anger that builds within our heart, there's a lot of passion that builds in our heart, and we find that we're getting into arguments with our own family, or with our own spouse, or with our children, or if we find that it's happening with our own friends, if we're finding that it happens with people in our own community, then we need to find ways to be able to convey that. We need to find ways to be able to communicate that. If anger starts taking over us, then that's the sign of a weak heart. That's the sign of a weak heart. And so to be able to build our hearts, we need to first build our own worship, and concurrently, we need to build our own behavior. And this is obviously a very constant process, and we hope that we can learn from the Sunnah to be able to learn from all of these aspects. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us one of those who consistently learn from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us one of those who consistently learn from the stories of the Sahaba. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us one of those who learn from our scholars. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us one of those who learn knowledge, and very authentic knowledge that is beneficial within our religion, and that can be passed on to our own children. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله العلي العظيم يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. قيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا